Hey everyone, and welcome to this Marvel Snap Beginner's Guide on the best way to counter the meta in Marvel Snap. And in this guide, I'll be showing you a number of cards and a number of ways as to how you can counter specific archetypes that are very common in Marvel Snap. And this is interesting because there's a number of things that happen in Marvel Snap that make it so that, you need to know what counters exist. First of all, there's featured locations, locations that really kind of are around for a day or two that kind of make people play a very specific style of deck, and you can either join in on that and play a deck that takes advantage of the featured location, or you can completely counter that style of deck and gain free cubes for basically a day or two, right? There's also, hold on, let's be honest here for a second. There's no matter what us YouTubers put in titles or put on thumbnails, there's no such thing as a 100% win rate deck. I'm guilty of it. Others are guilty of it too. But listen, it's because there's no way to confidently know, no matter what, that your opponent won't have a counter for your cards, because Marvel Snap does have this rock, scissors, paper style gameplay at times where you can get legitimately hard countered by specific cards and specific decks. And so let's actually showcase some of those in the archetypes and give you guys some examples. And this is up to pool 3. Anyways, you're a beginner anyway, so pool 4 and 5, this is a good starting point for you. The first thing to note is that Leech kind of counters everything. He's a 5/3, and if you can sneak him out earlier, like if you have Mr. Negative and he's a 3/5, or you Psylocke him out on 4, he basically removes all the abilities from your opponent's cards in their hand, and that's pretty devastating. So Leech is like the ultimate hard counter to pretty much everything in the game. It's a good thing he's like 5 cost, because he would be absolutely game breaking if Leech was any cheaper. But anyways, Leech, yeah, counters pretty much everything. Video done. No, I'm kidding. Let's go. All right, destroy deck counters. So destroy cards take advantage of increasing real estate on a location while also generating additional value. And, death is often used in the destroy decks. Every time a card's destroyed, you get the additional +1. This drops. You drop 3 cards. You can play her on turn 6. Then you can even Moon Girl, destroy more cards, and play multiple deaths at once if she's like a 3 cost, for instance, right? So death is how people try to actually run up the destroy decks. Now you can kind of counter this, because if they play Bucky Barnes and they're going to play Carnage on top, you can Polaris the Bucky Barnes into a new location and ruin their combo. That's a combination I really like, and a 3/5 is a really high tempo play on turn 3. You also have Cosmo, who will prevent cards from being destroyed, like Deathlock won't trigger. Other cards won't trigger. Destroyer won't trigger. So basically, Cosmo prevents the destroy decks from getting their combo off. And finally, Armor. Armor's the obvious. You've all seen it, where basically they play Bucky Barnes, Nova, and then you play Armor on top, and they play the Carnage, and nothing happens, and they retreat, right? Armor is probably the best card to counter destroy decks. It's just too valuable. It's just way too valuable against destroy decks. It completely ruins them, especially when you play it in the lane with their Bucky Barnes, their Nova, and other cards. The Hood is another good example of a card they might want to destroy. And, Armor is god tier against destroy decks. They got tempo deck counters. Now, tempo decks, what they try to do is they try to generate as much value on the board as possible on curve. So there's 2 strategies. You can either knock out their value with someone like Shang-Chi. You can extend the game to your advantage using someone like Magic, and hopefully, they don't plan for turn 7, so they run out of tempo for that later 7 turn, and also you can use Shang-Chi to destroy that on turn 7. And then you have the Goose, which will prevent them from playing high tempo 4, 5, and cost cards. But you can also disrupt their hand, which is kind of the other part of the core strategy. So this side of it disrupts what they have on the board, or disrupts their ability to play on the board. And then this side disrupts their hand and prevents them from playing on curve. Black Widow prevents them from drawing. And if they can't draw their cards they want to play on tempo, and as it is, Widow's Bite is a 0 value card, so you literally just occupy a place on the board and it's a 0 tempo play. It's completely hard countering. Korg puts a rock into their deck, they draw the rock. That's extremely poor tempo. Iceman increases the cost of one of the cards in their hand. That messes up their tempo plays. So tempo decks get really destroyed by disrupting their hand and preventing them from playing on tempo like they desire. Then we have the discard deck counters. Now, discard decks often utilize Invisible Woman. We talked about it in the last video. We talked about pool 3 card combos, and talked about Invisible Woman with the Hela plays. And there's a couple ways you can stop this combo from happening. The first is literally by putting Professor X on a location. Discarded cards cannot be discarded into Professor X's lockdown location, so that's cool. That prevents, you guarantee a win in that given location, but it also means that if they do pull off the Hela play, that their discards are going to be concentrated into 2 specific lanes, which is maybe even more problematic depending on the situation. But the ultimate counter is Cosmo. On turn 5, they have Invisible Woman. Invisible Woman sitting there like, ha ha ha, I'm going to discard all these cards. Turn 5, you slide Cosmo in there and just be like, no, you're not. You're going to discard nothing and Hela's going to come out and cry, right? Or they just retreat because they're not going to play on turn 6 with Hela. And so that's ultimately how you win. So if you're seeing a lot of like Invisible Woman discard decks, you just play Professor X, but Cosmo's really the primary counter you want because it just completely destroys Invisible Woman because it's so predictable. Like, it's Invisible Woman. There's 3 cards on her. Like, there's 2 cards on her. Like, you know what's going to happen. You slide Cosmo and you ruin the game for them. All right. Ongoing deck counters. So ongoing decks are very susceptible to both Enchantress and to Rogue, and they get completely dismantled by these 2 cards. And Rogue is a 3-1. A lot of people are like, yo, Rogue sucks. But have you ever played Rogue into an Iron Man and doubled the power of your lane while reducing their 5-cost play to basically 0? That's game-winning stuff, okay? And you've seen it in my highlights and my shorts and stuff where I, smash the horns buttons and stuff like that because Rogue makes insane game-winning plays. Yes, it's a 3-1, but you're stealing an ongoing ability. They lose it, you gain it. Whereas with the Enchantress, which is higher tempo, is a 4-4, you just remove all the ongoing effects, including your own, at a location. So there's some cards that like that, like Typhoid Mary and stuff like that. But if they're playing Patriot decks with Mystiques and stuff, and you play Enchantress on top of it, well, it just gets destroyed, right? So Enchantress will wipe out multiple, whereas Rogue has this like RNG. Like if they have like armor and they have Iron Man, it's a 50-50 as to which one you take. You can take the armor and just it does nothing, right? So that's the disadvantage of Rogue, but that is the power of Enchantress and obviously the tempo as well. But yeah, ongoing decks get ruined by these 2 cards. All right, on reveal deck counters. Now, on reveal cards are by far the most numerous in Marvel Snap, so there's going to be a ton of on reveal effects nearly all the time in this game, and the ones that really wreck it is Cosmo and Leech. I mean, Cosmo's the true champion of on reveal decimation because you just play Cosmo and like their on reveals do nothing, and they're just like, great, sad. It's best when you play Cosmo and they play an expensive card hoping to on reveal, like their Hela or whatever. And it just doesn't happen, and it's just like they play White Tiger into Cosmo because you slide out your Cosmo first based on your turn initiative. That is like immediate retreat territory, so Cosmo could be absolutely wild. And obviously we spoke about Leech before. Leech it destroys on reveals because they just don't reveal anymore, right? They just do nothing. So but I digress. Leech is like the ultimate destruction card for anything. Just ruins every combo possible. And we got movement deck counters. This is a little interesting because movement decks I've talked about in my Beginner's Guide series. I'm expecting them to get buffed in Pool 4 and 5. Movement decks are kind of bad right now. I hope that this video ages poorly and movement decks are now top tier. And, I'm going to release a video that says 100% win rate movement deck. I'm going to do it. But anyways, Miles Morales is a great counter because if they move a card, Miles Morales comes out as a 1-5. That's pretty cool. But you can't really rely on that. Obviously, Kraven's good too because you get value from that, from the movements. Kingpin is a good counter. I actually just pulled Kingpin today, ironically. And so Kingpin is great because if they try to move, like if they play a Heimdall and they push everyone into the Kingpin lane, then like everyone just gets wrecked, right? That's pretty cool. And obviously Professor X is awesome because no one can move in or out of a Professor X lane. So if people are playing lots of movement decks, you just Professor X and suddenly they can't do anything. And if you Professor X the middle lane, Heimdall, like they're just stuck. They're just stuck. They can't move anywhere, right? If you play on the left lane, Heimdall can still push them one lane over, right? But maybe he can. Maybe it's full. I don't know. But regardless, Professor X is a really solid counter to the move decks as well because it comes out before the Heimdall, and Heimdall is not really able to push through the locked location. Okay, Mr. Negative deck counters. The way to counter Mr. Negative, especially if like the peak is the live featured location, obviously Wave is great because Mr. Negative is all about turn 6 and 7 plays. They really want to just like burst out a ton of cards. One card I should have added here maybe is even like Storm or Scarlet Witch, because if they play like Magic on 5 to make Limbo and you play on turn 6 like Scarlet Witch and just get rid of Limbo, and they're holding their cards hoping for turn 7 and they just don't play turn 7 because it doesn't exist anymore, that's pretty awesome. I've done that in multiple highlights. And then you got the Professor X, which is great because they're often on turn 5 still amassing cards, because on turn 4 they play Mr. Negative. All the cards get wiped sideways, and then what they do is every time they draw, they're drawing a Mr. Negative card, right? A card that's inverted. The cards in their hand are not inverted yet. So they want to draw a couple cards. That's why Magic is so important on turn 5. But they play Magic on turn 5 as a 5/3 herself, and you play Professor X, like you just win. Like there's nothing they can do. So it's pretty awesome. Sandman prevents them from playing more than 1 card per turn. Huge, big stat for them because they're going to want to play like 6 cards on turn 6 or 7. And then Leech basically makes their entire hand completely useless. And they do still get some value on some of the inverted cards, but ultimately Leech does destroy them a little bit there. And then you have the Zoo deck counters. Now, Zoo decks are pretty awesome. They're very, very common in the earlier metagame. A lot of my beginner decks are Zoo decks because they're kind of the cards you have access to in Pool 1. The problem is that Zoo decks often fall off completely as you move into Pool 3 and above because they are incredibly easy to counter. They are wildly easy to counter. Mojo counters it, but even earlier on, Scorpion, Punisher, Killmonger completely destroy these Zoo decks. Like, if you're holding a wide hand and, like, you're playing, small cards, like, those cards get destroyed by the -1 power. Hitting a Hulk with -1 power doesn't really matter percentage-wise. But like hitting Iceman feels terrible because now you just halved his power. Punisher counters the Zoo decks because obviously as you zoo out, he gains more power. Killmonger just wipes them all out. Wave prevents you from zooing out because obviously you can only play 1 card. The same thing as Sandman. And then the newly buffed Spider-Woman is a 5/7. Basically, you're probably going to have a location with 4 cards in it. Like it's probably gonna be the Ant-Man location with armor, and Spider-Woman penetrates the armor, right? It hits you with the on reveal effect, so Spider-Woman becomes a 5/11 basically because you're dropping them by 4 and you're increasing Spider-Woman herself. So like it's a huge tempo play. Honestly, this deck is extremely risky to play in Pool 3. It really is. And then you got the junk deck combos. Now junk decks they use Vipers, ironically, who's also a counter. They use Debris to knock garbage into your side. But ultimately, what you can do is you can destroy those. I mean, I should have Deathlock here as well. I don't know why I forgot to put Deathlock here, but Deathlock clears the lane. Venom eats everything, clears the lane. Carnage destroys everything, gets the buffs, clears the lane. Viper kicks garbage back, clears the lane. So like there's ways to kind of deal with that. Like if you're seeing lots of junk decks, I would be playing destruction decks because they just basically get rid of all that garbage. And like even Debris, for instance, will put junk on their side too. So they might Debris into Patriot or something like that. But ultimately, again, Deathlock should be here. It's an omission on my behalf. But at the end of the day, destroy decks will hard counter the junk decks because you just keep wiping the garbage off the board, and like their destroy cards aren't going to generate enough tempo, whereas you're going to be generating significant tempo, especially with someone like Carnage. And then you got the big hand deck combos. Now, these combos are often done in the Devil Dinosaur Moon Girl collector style decks, which are pretty common in Pool 1 and 2, so you'll see these a lot. They are best countered by Shang-Chi, so if you see a Devil Dinosaur, Shang-Chi punches it out. In Pool 3, be very cognizant, however, if you see Devil Dinosaur, a very popular combo is Devil Dinosaur into Arnim Zola, which means that the Zola destroys that dinosaur and replicates it on 2 other locations. So if you have turn initiative, Shang-Chi punches the dinosaur out first and Zola hits nothing. But if you don't have turn initiative, Zola comes, gets the Devil Dinosaur, moves it up to 2 other locations, and Shang-Chi can't punch Zola because it's a 6/0. So note that. Also, Scorpion's good against big hand decks because they basically it negatively impacts all the cards, which they might have 6 or 7 cards in their hand. But obviously, if Devil Dinosaur doesn't really care too much about that. And then you got Ronin the Accuser, who's a good counter. So if they're playing large hand decks, you play Ronin, you basically take advantage of those deck sizes. And then Goblin counters. Goblins are truly infuriating to play against. They can be extremely frustrating here. Basically, you play Green Goblin, so they play Green Goblin or Hobgoblin on your side. You can carnage them, you can destroy them. Not only do you kind of get rid of their tempo, but you also basically get a buff on your own side. You clear them with Deathlock, which is cool as well. Odin's interesting because let's say they play Hobgoblin on 5 and you Odin on 6. You'll redo the reveal and send it back to their side of the board, given that there is space for them to do so. So that's a pretty funky play. And low key as well, there's a good play with Viper as well. You can play Viper on top of Green Goblin or Hobgoblin, and Viper, if it's the only card in that location, will knock the Green Goblin back onto the other side, provided there's space as well. All right, massive turn 6 plays are the norm in Marvel Snap. So A lot of players play their decks around massive turn 6 plays, and learning to counter those plays can be hugely beneficial for you as well. And there's two cards that really stand out from that perspective, and they're Shang-Chi and Professor X. Professor X, it comes out on turn 5, so their turn 6 play is less impactful if one of the lanes is already locked down and lost, especially if they're trying to like get value from like playing a destroyer card and destroying their Bucky Barnes Nova or whatever, and now those cards can't be impacted by the Professor X lane. So Professor X, a really good play there. Obviously, we have Shang-Chi. How many times have I talked about Shang-Chi? It's like one of the absolute god tier counter cards in the game. If they play an Infinite Magneto, anything above 9, if they have turn initiative, especially meaning their card reveals first and you can predict the location they're playing in, then you just punch those cards out, and it's hugely devastating to their play. So I love Shang-Chi. I think he's absolutely wild. He is a great card that is a great counter in so many decks. And anytime there's a big turn 6 play coming that's very predictable, like the Infinite Sunspot type play, then Shang-Chi is just begging to get thrown out there to, basically knock him straight out. Location counters, and this is kind of funny. Location counters, why would you want to counter a location? Because some locations are devastating. First of all, you have the featured locations that you can either counter the featured locations by playing a deck that counters those locations, or you can just get rid of the location, right? Quake will flip them, which doesn't really count. Quake is probably the least reliable here. Like, I dislike Quake, honestly. But Scarlet Witch just gets rid of that featured location. And if you have a disadvantaged location that does not work well, you get rid of it. Storm gets rid of it. Rhino gets rid of it, right? This becomes flooded. This becomes ruins. And this becomes a random other one. And Uatu is interesting as well because in the event, like let's say the Raft, which is the one if you fill, you get a free 6-cost card. Let's say like you see that and it's like the third location on the side revealed on turn 3. You have Uatu in your hand. You're like, I kind of want to play some cards there. You play some cards there to get that free 6-cost card, whereas your opponent wouldn't have known until turn 3 when it revealed. So you can often play around locations very effectively with Uatu. Quake is the least reliable in this list, but Scarlet Witch, Storm, and Rhino will all counter locations wonderfully. And if you're new to the game, I really recommend at a minimum you have Scarlet Witch in probably every deck that you have. And that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed this series so far, my Marvel Snap Beginner's Guide, and I got another video for you, and I really hope that you watch it and you enjoy, because this is a wonderful series for this amazingly complex but awesome game. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.